So just so as it's clear, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. So I don't know whether it's going to be any good. So in order to make it worthwhile, I always provide chocolate at my talk. Now, sometimes there's a Dharma teaching in the chocolate. There's always a Dharma teaching in chocolate, isn't there? Yeah. So my friend Merlin is a philanthropist, and he's brought lots of chocolate. So there's no shortage of chocolate for this talk. So there he is. So, I brought some chocolate here. Is there anybody who doesn't like chocolate? Okay, good. So I did bring some healthy snacks, if that wasn't the case. I've also got some Belgian chocolate that isn't vegan. Now, it needs to be eaten because it'll melt. Would anybody be willing to put themselves out to do that? Yeah. All right, thank you. So share. Don't eat it all yourself. Share out the merit. Anybody else wants to? So can you pass that back? This is non-vegan. Yeah, it's kind of needs particularly. What's the word? Committed people to deal with it. And another piece of non-vegan chocolate. Yeah, right at the back there. So so far I've managed to never hit anybody with it. And this one is also not vegan. Sorry. Okay, so there's 2 bars in there. Can you pass that back? Yeah. And then the vegan chocolate. Who would like some vegan chocolate? Now, don't start eating the chocolate yet. All right. So, can you pass this to anybody? That's going to be a. All right. Thank you, Caroline. Yeah. So, when you get the chocolate, when it comes your way, before it comes to you, notice what's going on inside. And then when you've got the chocolate and you've tasted it, really mindfully, notice what goes on then. So my imagining, or my hope, was that there's an anticipation. Chocolate's coming. There's the taking the chocolate. You put it in. There's satisfaction for a moment, and then it's gone. And then it's kind of like, where's the chocolate? Is there another piece? And so chocolate does teach the nature of reality in that it's impermanent, unsatisfactory, ultimately, and insubstantial. So I'll just go through that again. Impermanent, it's not going to last forever. Unsatisfactory, because it's not brought you permanent satisfaction. And insubstantial. So you're probably quite disappointed now. Okay. So that's the chocolate teaching over with. No, some of you can leave now. So courage. Vulnerability. And the healing of the world. So when I said I didn't know what I was going to talk about, I mean it. Yeah. And but I'm wanting to trust that something, been practicing for 30 years, that there's something will come through. You have to give a title. You can't just sort of say, I'm going to sit there and see what happens. They want to know, the people who run the Dharmapala want to know what's the title of your talk. And so I thought it was a nice title. And I like the word courage. And I know that the theme for the festival this year is Seeds of the Heart. Is that right? Have I got that? So I wanted something connected with heart. And courage, I believe, or I suspect, I haven't researched this, but comes from the French cœur, which means heart. So to be in the heart. I can certainly feel my heart beating at the moment. I don't know, how about you? So there could be different ways that this is going for you. It could be that you're sitting there sort of thinking, come on, Jayaraja, come on, you can do it. Or you're going to be thinking, oh my God, why did I sit so near the front? I know, how do I get out of this? That's an hour of my time wasted. And then you've just heard me say, an hour? Oh no. So I don't think I'll be quite that long. I've got a workshop starting. So, courage. So that's it. Yes, there's a connection between courage and faith. Starting to feel a bit of relief now. Yeah, that's kind of part of my mind is going, yeah, you could go down this track. Oh, yes. So faith. So in Buddhism, faith, the word faith comes as often talked about as shraddha. Shraddha. Have you heard that word before? Shraddha. Which means placing the heart upon. Placing the heart upon. That which we place the heart upon. So, what do you place the heart upon? What do we place the heart upon? We often, I think, we place the heart upon, even though we might not want to do that, upon seeking of pleasure and wanting to avoid pain. Certainly, you come to the Buddha Field Festival, I don't know about you, but there's so much excitement. There's so much, whoa! Lots of friends, some people you've not seen for a year, whose names you've forgotten, and they're really pleased to see you, and so but there's an excitement, placing the heart upon pleasure and avoiding pain. That's what we human beings do. So we're going back to the chocolate now. There's the idea that nothing is ultimately satisfying. It's impermanent, it's not ultimately satisfying, and it's empty. So have you come across this list before? These three, in Buddhism, they're called the 3 marks. The 3 marks of conditioned existence. And there's a very good book, or I enjoyed it, it's called What Makes You Not a Buddhist. Anybody read it? So it's What Makes You Not a Buddhist. And he's basically talking about the 3 marks. He's a film director, so it's quite cool. He's quite a cool, hip take on Buddhism. That's not me, by the way. So, yes, 3 marks: impermanent, unsatisfactory, and empty. So it's empty in the sense of it's not fixed. It's empty as in that it's also, there's not a solid container within which that fits. It is relational. So on your way here this morning, there was all manner of things going on, I imagine. Will there be a place? Might have been one of them. Will my friends be there? Will the person who said they'll meet me at the talk turn up? So there's all this sense in which our mind is kind of creating reality. I think that's one of the aspects of the empty nature of reality. Our mind is constantly creating our reality. And just taking that in for a second, I feel even more nervous because you're sat there looking at me and I'm thinking, oh no. I'm suddenly creating a reality where people are gobsmacked thinking, this is rubbish. Yeah? So that's the reality I can suddenly start to create. And then I remember it's impermanent. So I know that at the end I can go away and it won't last forever. Oh, relief. So impermanence isn't just a negative thing. It's not a negative thing. It's an aspect that illustrates the nature of reality. I always remember, I don't know whether you noticed that, whether you could see it, but my hand's really shaking, yeah. And I remember being at an event that Sangadara, who's somewhere here, he's the guy with the blue mask, but he's probably, here he is, he's getting a mention now. So he was doing a presentation to the chairs, and he stood up and he's kind of papers like that, and he went, oh, I didn't know, I was nervous. And it was such a beautiful moment. Yeah, it was such a beautiful moment that he was kind of like, wow. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't hiding him. Well, it was obvious that he couldn't hide himself, but he was just kind of acknowledging it. Yeah, and then stop it! You're embarrassing me now. Yeah. Yeah, impermanence. So yes, that's it. I was on a roll, wasn't I? I thought I was on a roll about the nature of reality. So impermanence is not always, it's not a negative thing, whereas we can tend to think about it as a negative thing. 100 years from now, none of us are going to be here. We'll all be dead. And the thing about time is sometimes, like last night, I've got quite bad arthritis sometimes, and sometimes it's really painful. And when it is so painful, those times last a long time. You notice that? When you're feeling sad. And so what do? Time isn't linear. It's it is partly, it flies when we're enjoying ourselves and drags when we're struggling. Anyway. So yeah, so I wanted to talk a bit about faith, I think, but also about in Buddhism, faith is faith in the reality of these 3 marks: impermanent, unsatisfactory, and empty. So the fact is, we are going to die, and knowing that we're going to die is not It's not a bad thing. It's kind of one of the things that makes everything significant, because what do we do in the time that we have? And it is a huge responsibility knowing that our lives matter. Yeah. And depending on the conditions that we've grown up in, life will have sort of to work through either some really difficult circumstances, or it can be quite blessed. So if you grew up in a household where there was your parents were struggling to be present with themselves, and thereby struggling to be present with you, there'll be, there's a lot of kind of hard work to kind of take that into adulthood and transform who you are and how you make sense of life. And if you were blessed with parents who were attentive to themselves and to you, you still live in a world where there is a lot of suffering. And there will also be internal suffering. And you will also give yourself a hard time about sort of thinking, here I am, so blessed, with so many advantages, and I'm struggling. There must be something wrong with me. Yeah. So it's hard being a human being. A friend of mine wrote a book called This Difficult Thing Being Human, which is a lovely book. And the basic premises of it is the metabhavna. Yeah. And I think he does draw on the work of Paul Gilbert. Anybody here familiar with Paul Gilbert? Yeah. So Paul Gilbert wrote a book called The Compassionate Mind. And you might not enjoy this talk, but one thing you can take from it is Paul Gilbert. Yeah? So go away and do a YouTube search, Paul Gilbert, talk kindly to yourself, or talk nicely to yourself, or something like that. And there's 5 talks there, and they're beautiful to listen to. He's kind of just talking about the need for kindness. So I was talking about, wasn't I, about the empty nature of things, and that it's mind created. So it is mind created, and there are conditions. There are what's called in Buddhism samskaras, which are habit patterns. So these habit patterns, many of them, if not most of them, were set in motion. I see them more like grooves, like the way the rain, when it falls on the land, creates particular grooves. And so it is with our minds, that we've got particular grooves. One of the grooves in my mind was feeling such fear, I think, as a child, and confusion about why it was the way it was, that I masked that vulnerability with a fierce physicality. I think the fact that I was probably born with far too much cholesterol going through my system following my mother falling down the stairs when she was pregnant with me, 8 months pregnant, that my system was probably flooded with cholesterol, which is a steroid. So though I was a titch, I was kind of a bit like a mini Hulk. Yeah. So and to hide that vulnerability, I kind of came across as incredibly tough, fierce, which kind of has its benefits, but it has its drawbacks. I could have played small. That would have been another way. But my my physicality led to a certain kind of way of being in the world, as will of yours. And some of as I say, these grooves in the mind, it's kind of like learning to see them. Oh, I'm like that. And rather than giving yourself a hard time for being like that, just being able to be tender. To kind of sort of go, oh, Jayaraja, you've not prepared your talk again. Why do you keep doing that? It makes me so nervous. Yeah? It's kind of like just meeting yourself with understanding and speaking softly, internally, to be able to allow who you are to come more to the fore, to flourish. So yes, I was talking about faith, wasn't it? And there's just, because it's always good to have a bit of a list, Buddhist list. I don't know why Buddhism has got so many lists, but it does have lots of lists, which I've found helpful over the years. So you go, oh yeah, all right. So faith in Buddhism, so is faith in the three marks? Forgotten what I was going to say now. Oh yes, the list. Thank you. Yeah. So faith is based upon experience. Yeah. So you practice something, and you kind of, oh yeah, this works. This works. This improves my state of mind. Yeah. I remember the first time I went to a Buddhist. It's a Buddhist ritual called a puja, and I went to it, and I thought, this seems pretty weird. Yeah. But let's see how it affects my mind. Let's see how I am at the end of it to see. And so I kept bringing my mind back from sort of thinking strange, weird, you know. And at the end, I sort of thought, God, that was really quite lovely. My mind had been perfumed by doing this ritual that I didn't really understand particularly. So it gave me some sort of sense of, oh yeah, there's something in this, it works. So experience. Another time of that was, I remember I used to work, I lived in Brighton, and I would drive out to the country with a bunch of young people who had been long-term unemployed, and I was teaching them how to work in the outdoors with kids. And sometimes I'd be grouchy, and sometimes I'd be in a really cheery mood driving out. And I remember sort of noticing, God, why am I so cheery this morning? And it was pretty much every time I'd done the metta bhavana, every time I'd done the practice of loving kindness. And it was like it took 2 hours. In the meditation, I'm just kind of going, may I be well. You know, but it's almost like it took 2 hours for it to kind of sink down into my being. And then I was starting to sort of think, oh yeah, I feel really good. Yeah. So, you know, so that experience gave me faith in the metta bhavana. And also I told this story about some of you will have heard this story, about my mum falling down the stairs when she was 8 months pregnant with me. And actually, it wasn't my mum that told me that. What happened was, in meditation one time, I'm sitting meditating, and then suddenly I am overwhelmed with fear and terror, and the sweat is running down my back, and my heart is going at about 180, and I open my eyes. It was in the Brighton Buddhist Centre, and there's no one in the shrine room except me and the Buddha, and I'm kind of going, what is going on? You know, just kind of, and I didn't know what was going on, but the experience was familiar. And then over the period of about 3 months, I became able to sit with that experience of terror that would arise every time I sat and meditated. So as it became that I could sort of go, oh, it's there again. And I could feel my heart and I could feel the sweat. But I could be with it more tenderly without kind of freaking out, without having to open my eyes. And as I sat there, after about 3 months of this experience happening daily, you might have sort of thought, why on earth did he carry on after that? But it was kind of like, I guess it was faith. So as I'm sitting there, I suddenly realise I have a sense that I'm listening, as if listening above for a second heartbeat. I could hear my heartbeat, and it was almost like I was listening. There isn't another heartbeat there, but it feels like there should be when I'm with this experience. And I sort of go, yeah, I'm in the womb. And so my mum was still alive, and so I came back from the meditation. It was before the days of mobile phones. So you ring on the landline. Do you know what those are? They're kind of these. So it's my mum. So I get hold of my mum, and I say, "Mum, when you were pregnant with me, or when you were giving birth, did anything go wrong?" Now, obviously, she hadn't been sort of thinking for the previous 30 years. God, thank God that's worked out all right, you know. So she went, "No, I don't think so." And I kind of said, "Are you sure? Do you remember the pregnancy well at all, or the giving birth?" And she said, "I remember the time." And then obviously it started firing her memory, and she was saying, "Yeah, it was in the evening because I remember they said they had to." And then as she kind of started to open to that aspect of her memory, she went, "Oh my God!" She said, "I'd completely forgotten." And I said, "What is it?" And she said, "I was 8 months pregnant with you, and I fell down the stairs." And quite a way down the stairs, and she said, "I started to bleed quite heavily, and I was taken to hospital. And they could still hear a heartbeat. So they thought, he's alive, or she's alive." Is that what they thought? Because the nurses said, it's going to be a girl. Yeah, it's going to be a girl, because girls survive much better than boys in the womb. So I knew this was going to be about identity politics. But, I hadn't figured it would come this way. So, so yeah. And the realising of that was quite strong, and it was also reassuring for my mum to tell me that. And it gave me a lot of faith in my practice, my meditation. Though the experience of my heart being crushed at times continued. I haven't had it in some time, but it continued that I would sometimes feel scared, and I would feel that my heart was being compressed. Anyway. I want to keep an eye on the time, so I don't want to keep you too long. When I drank then, I noticed my hand wasn't quite shaking so much, and when I noticed that, it started shaking again. Something about reflective self-consciousness, that's difficult, isn't it? So faith, primarily it's experience, but it's also reason. So you reflect. Is there anything I know that isn't subject to impermanence? Is there anything that's permanent? Is there anything that is not dependent upon something else? Is there anything that is ultimately satisfying? And when I said that, is there anything that ultimately satisfying? What came to mind for me was Ryan Giggs' goal against Arsenal in the 1999 semi-final of the League Cup, the FA Cup. Actually, I think that is ultimately satisfying. I think I've just undermined my own faith. Though, interesting enough, I noticed Ben, who's sitting just in front of me here, he's a good friend of mine, and he's an Arsenal supporter, so it's ultimately unsatisfying for him. Yeah. So, So reason as an aspect of faith. And then the last thing is intuition. Now this is a tricky one, intuition, isn't it? Because has anybody ever kind of thought that they were going off intuition and really it's just preference, desire, longing? Yeah. Yep. I see at least one nod. So yeah, so intuition is a tricky one, but it's, for me, intuition is this sense of actually being attuned deeply to myself, my belly and my heart, and having the space to open to that and to see what the guidance is that's coming from that. So this is faith in Buddhism: reason, experience, and intuition. So it's kind of difficult. It's difficult being a human being, as I've said. But it's particularly difficult in this age to actually to have faith, I think. Our culture and society is awash with views. The Buddha, there's a great story where the Buddha, in the, I'll use the posh Buddhist word because it's supposed to be a Buddhist talk, in the Digha Nikaya, which is the long sayings or the lengthy sayings of the Buddha, the first one is the Brahmajala Sutta. Anybody read the Brahmajala Sutta? Good. Yeah. So you'll be able to enumerate the 62 wrong views, won't you? So the Buddha, basically the Buddha is walking along, and it seems to be quite a standard thing where he is walking along with 500 bhikkhus, yeah, and they're kind of walking along, and following along with this group of bhikkhus is Suppiya, who's he's the teacher from another tradition, and Suppiya is walking with one of his disciples, and Suppiya is running the Buddha down. And his disciple is saying, no, he's not like that. So his disciple is standing up for the Buddha, which is really going to piss him off, isn't it? Because he's sort of thinking, I want to be the teacher, not the Buddha. The Buddha's useless. He doesn't know anything. And his disciple is saying, no, he's really good at you. And so the Buddha's disciples are kind of listening to this as they're going along. Anyway, they stop for the night. And then and they're still going on. The disciple and the teacher are still arguing. And the monks are still listening in. And the following morning, the monks are all talking about, or the bhikkhus are all talking about, oh, did you hear what was going on there? Yeah, he said that. And then the Buddha kind of comes in and says, oh, what were you talking about just now? Which is another thing that happens quite a bit in the Pali Canon. The Buddha kind of coming in and saying, what were you guys just talking about? Yeah. At one time where he comes in, he sort of says, if you're not going to talk about the Dharma or reality, it's probably better to keep stum. Yeah. It's probably better to say nothing. The noble silence is the phrase he uses, because I think they were talking about kings, football, and that kind of thing, wars. Yeah. Anyway, so the Buddha says, what were you talking about? And he says, we were talking about Suppiya and his disciple and their argument. And some of them were sort of getting quite heated. And the Buddha said, when you get angry, does it help you see the clarity of what they're saying? No, Lord. And he said, right. Or if you get elated, sort of thinking he's saying good things about the Buddha, does that help you with clarity to see what's going on? No, Lord. And he said, yeah, so it's important to notice when the mind kind of gets intoxicated or moves towards anger, it is difficult to measure and to assess whether what somebody is saying is true or false. Yeah? And then he goes further. He says to the guys, what the general populace will say about us will kind of generally be considered according to the cultural views of the time. This is my translation, yeah? So they'll say that they like this and they don't like that. Or that's questionable and this isn't. And he says, but basically a lot of it comes from the cultural perspective or what they like and don't like. So it would be a bit like, you taking home a new boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, and your parents sort of thinking, has he got good manners? What's he dressed like? Is he kind of cool enough? Is he kind of, has he got a good enough job? Has she got a good enough job? Or whatever, yeah? So that would be the kind of the societal way of looking at it. And the Buddha says, that doesn't really matter. It's not of great significance what the general population think. It is this leading towards awakening? Is it leading towards compassion? Is it leading towards, from a different sutta, the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha says, is this, when I reflect on it deeply, is it for my benefit and the benefit of others? And is it commended by the wise? Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Is it to my benefit, the benefit of others, and commended by the wise? He doesn't say who the wise are. And in this day and age, it's kind of difficult to know who the wise are. And because it's difficult to know who the wise are, yes, this is what I wanted to talk about. It's there's so many views out there. You go onto YouTube, yeah, you go onto social media, there's just thousands upon thousands of views, which are all subsets of the 62 wrong views. Is that right? So, now, bearing in mind, so I was imagining you guys walking across the field to come to the talk, and your mind's creating the reality as you walk. Now, bearing in mind that your minds create reality, what things are you putting in there? Where are you drawing the sources of inspiration and nourishment from? What are you committed to? What is worth being committed to? Now, if you're just subject to your own mind and your own bias and preference, are you ever going to grow? Are you ever going to find the path to freedom, which is what the Buddha was trying to point out? How do you find that path to freedom when you're subject to your own bias and your own craving for pleasure and to avoid pain? I'm kind of making a connection. So there I was meditating in the shrine room. It wasn't, sort of struggling. As I say, it's kind of bringing up terror. And I stuck with it. So I'm making a connection between those two things. And I don't want to be pompous in any way, but I'm trying to, there's something significant about that. Okay, I think it's to do with meaning. So, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, actually we can kind of get out of that, go beyond that if we're looking for meaning. So what gives our life meaning? And for me, I realized I remember reading about something called the Bodhisattva ideal. Have you heard of the Bodhisattva ideal? Put your hands up if you heard of the Bodhisattva ideal. I remember when I heard the Bodhisattva ideal, don't worry if you don't know what it is, I'm going to tell you in a moment. It just felt, wow, that's worth giving my life to. So the Bodhisattva ideal is the ideal of working to attain awakening or liberation for the sake of all beings. So I undertake to awaken for the benefit of all beings. And it's kind of guiding, using that as a guiding principle of your life. Yeah. So yeah, the Bodhisattva ideal, I think, is a sublime thing to risk your life with, to kind of sort of think, I want to focus on that. So am I moving towards that? How do you know if you're moving towards it? I guess if you're becoming more contented, if you're becoming kinder, and kinder to yourself, able to meet yourself with a kind of warmth, tenderness and curiosity and forgiveness, because we're all flawed. Anyone here not flawed? Please raise your hand. Yeah. Okay. Yes, that's true. Danny isn't flawed. So I'll finish with a story. I told this story recently at Al Foxton, and I couldn't quite understand why I wanted to tell the story then, and I'm not quite sure why I want to tell it now, but I like the story. And I'm hoping my friend that it involves is one of those painful things that you sort of, embarrassing things that you quickly scrub out of your memory. So if he ever watches this talk, he'll think, what a strange thing. So I went to see this friend of mine, and he was house sitting for another friend. And he said, I said, oh, how's it going? And then we were kind of chatting, and we were in his kitchen. And then the washing machine was just coming to the end of its cycle. And he says, oh, there is a problem with the flat. The washing machine doesn't work. And I said, oh, it seems to be working. He said, no, you can't open the door at the end. So I have to get a spoon, and then I kind of work at the lock, and then I can open it. And I sort of say, really? And he said, yeah. I said, how long does that take? And he said, yeah, it's usually about a minute. So I sort of said, can I have a go? Can you give me the spoon? He says, yeah, sure. So the washing, it finishes, and I kind of stand there with the spoon. And then the machine goes, click. And you open the door, and he went, what? I said, yeah, it's kind of standard on a washing machine, when it finishes, there's a minute before you can open the door. I never knew that. So it's kind of like, now you're laughing at him, but that's the nature of reality. Yeah? It's impermanent. That means you're going to die. It's unsatisfactory. So you're never going to find the happily ever after. The romantic. They're kind of like, oh yes, at last. The perfect job, the perfect partner, the perfect house, the perfect location, and the horse, and the and the dog, and the cat. The perfect cat. Sorry, Merlin. So, and it's also mind created. Yeah. So it's empty. And by empty, I'm sort of wanting to include that aspect of, in Buddhism, they use the word empty. It's shunyata, which means it is translated as empty, but it also means possibility or openness. So where was I? I was trying to finish, wasn't I? Oh, yes. Yeah, so bearing in mind that the washing machine opens after a minute, you don't need to fiddle with the lock. Yeah. And bearing in mind the nature of reality is impermanent, insubstantial, and unsatisfactory, what are you going to do with your life? Where are you going to find the commitment, to liberate your mind? And having said that, I'd just like to encourage you to trust in your innate wisdom. Practice, develop friendships, but continually meet yourself with kindness. Not the kindness that is indulging, but the kindness that holds both the ideal of, yes, I want to practice meditation and I stayed in bed again this morning, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, I stayed in bed, it's okay, and I want to do that. Yeah, holding both your aspiration and your failings with kindness. Okay, I think that's enough, don't you? Thank you.